Well, good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Well, thank you all for being here, and we're going to start, the discussion and the dialogue. The first point is, why are we here today? We are here today to stress the importance of national security in an academic setting, and the second question based on that is, how are we going to be able to do it? The answer that we are entertaining is that the only way to do it is via partnerships. Now, you know that for every partnership, we need various actors to play together, to work together, and at the same time, each partner needs to see that they are getting something out of it. It has to be a win-win-win situation. And this is what brings us together. We have representatives from universities, from industry, and from mission-driven agencies, and it's an honor to have you, Dr. Walker, with us today. So let me start very briefly by mentioning that in academia, our relationship with mission-driven agencies is a little bit uneasy. And we want to receive the funding, but we don't want the restriction that comes with it. Therefore, the question is it a sustainable model to keep doing it in this way? Well, we believe that there are alternatives, and that's what we will be discussing today. And Dr. Walker is here to talk to us about not only his vision for DARPA, but how he also works, and he would like DARPA to work with companies and with universities. At the same time, during this dialogue, we will offer maybe different models that could be very enticing to all the parties to explore. So without further ado, let me start by welcoming one more time Dr. Walker. It's an honor to have you here. And you have outlined very direct priorities for DARPA. And those are research priorities. Would you like to start a little bit by sharing with us how you view the mission of DARPA and how these priorities fit with respect to this mission?
Sure. Thank you for having me, Joseph, and thank you, CSIS, for also having me as well. I love the title of the conference, Implementing Innovation, because you can be innovative, but if you don't implement it, if you don't apply it, if you don't use it, what's the use? To your point, mission, DARPA, develop breakthrough technologies for national security. That's really been our mission for 61 years now, and we take it very seriously. When I became director, I outlined 4 key areas that I wanted DARPA to focus on, and for those of you who know DARPA, you know it's a very bottoms-up organization. We really go out and hire the best and brightest people we can find, bring them in, and we don't hire them just on their backgrounds. We hire them because of the ideas they have, right? And the ideas they can bring to national security. So we get a lot of our program ideas and what we do from our program managers, but it's important for the leader of the organization to say, here's what I care about. So the 4 areas that I laid out: defend the homeland against existential threats. And so when you think about cyber, you can think about dirty bombs in cities. You can think about bio threats to the country and how to defend against those. Those are sort of what I include in terms of defend the homeland against existential threats. The second area, and the area that the DOD is talking a lot about, is the competition with peer adversaries. And so how to prevail if necessary, but really before prevailing, deterring an event with a peer competitor. And so that's about things like hypersonics and things like having a robust space architecture, controlling the electromagnetic spectrum, which Northeastern is helping us with in terms of allowing radios to communicate with artificial intelligence and to deconflict from one another. That's what those pieces are about. The third area was effectively getting better at stabilization efforts across the globe. You know, since 9/11, we've been focused on trying to stabilize societies and counter terrorism. How do we get better at that? Because we're doing a lot of it. And how do we do it more efficiently? And the fourth area is really where we connect with the university community, and that is winning the tech races of the 21st century, our foundational research. And so you can think artificial intelligence, which DARPA has been funding for about 56 years, I believe. Electronics, and how do we have the best electronics for our systems that we need moving forward. Quantum computing and alternative ways to compute. And then this whole area of biotech, and how do we engineer biology to use it to protect US soldiers, for instance. And so these are the sort of the higher level strategic areas that I set out for the agency that I wanted our folks to focus on and bring me ideas in to answer your question. But in all those areas, I want to be innovative, and I think DARPA has some key ingredients on how we've been innovative over all these years, which we could talk about later, but I want to apply that innovation. And so everything we do, from the most basic work at universities to advanced development, we have a purpose, and we try and answer the question, what problem are we trying to solve, right from the beginning? And I think that can motivate good, basic, open research as well.
Great. So, you know, we say that innovation without execution is hallucination, and that's what you were mentioning here. So how do you deal precisely with the transition from innovation to execution?
Well, it's not always easy, let me just say. You can be innovative and you can produce the greatest widget in the world. How do you get the customer, which in our case the customer is the warfighter, how do you get the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps to take that new widget and do something with it, fight a different way? They have a much harder problem than I do. I can invent the widget. They have to actually learn how to train with it, how to educate their workforce on it, and make it robust and reliable. And so it's a back and forth, it's a give and take. But I think it's really, really important because it's part of the role of the government in this three-legged stool of government, academia, and industry. Part of the role of government is to lay out the problem set in national security, lay out the problem set, and develop the strategic approach to actually not just being innovative, but taking it all the way. And that requires the different parts of the government to work together and partner. Sean O'Keefe said this is about partnerships, and I agree. Sometimes the hardest partnerships are inside the government. But that is required in order to have this implementation path, right?
So DARPA is loved by universities, and you love us back. But if there is anything, any dimension that you would wish universities to further in their relationship with DARPA?
Well, universities are, when I think, again, the three-legged stool, universities provide two things to DARPA and the broader national security community, I believe. One is ideas. So we talk about DARPA, former director Tony Tether liked to talk about DARPA bridging the gap between the far side ideas and bring that into the warfighter's capability space. I believe the universities provide those far side ideas. I was a program manager of basic research for the Air Force. Along the lines in my career, dealt exclusively with universities. The ideas were generated there and then typically brought into DARPA to apply. So that's one thing. Workforce is the second thing. So you provide the people, the educated people that go to industry or go to government to help us solve national security problems. We need you to keep doing that. We need you to keep attracting the best and brightest from all over the world, actually, to do that. And we have several, within DARPA, we have several programs. One I'm thinking of right now called the JUMP program, which is in our microelectronics space. which is focused on working with industry. It's a 60% funded by industry, 40% funded by DARPA. That basically is money going to universities in the electronic space, working on open, publishable work. But what's really doing is providing that next generation of scientists and engineers that want to work on national security problems. And that's important to the government, but also industry.
Not everybody is like Sean, who did it all, being a university president, at the same time being in industry. When you look at the triangle involving industry, DARPA, and universities, do you think that this triangle is functioning well, or is there anything more that we can do together?
Well, I think it functions pretty well. I think DARPA does a really good job at developing new research communities with the academic community, with industry, small and large companies. We are, for instance, in the media forensics area right now, we have been funding mostly universities and academic institutions, small companies, using AI to develop ways to understand deepfakes in pictures and videos. And the Googles and Facebooks of the world are interested, but we're providing that sort of foundational knowledge base now and working with those companies to make sure they have the latest and greatest tools to fight this issue. I think DARPA does a really good job at that. You know, universities, I've been a bit interested in your model that I'm hearing about, which is creating a place where you can do classified work and leaving it up to your professors and faculty whether they want to engage in that way. That's certainly, I think, a way we can plug into university talent and have them work on national security problems. That is a plus for DARPA, and that helps DARPA and that helps all of DOD be better. So I would encourage that type of thinking. You might want to say a little bit more about what that is.
Well, thank you, Dr. Walker. The idea being that we have a campus focusing on security, where you know we can do sensitive and classified research, and the model is that from day one we built the campus with mission-driven agencies. Dr. Perconte is here because the Army Research Lab is housing its northeast operation there. At the same time, we have companies that embedded their talent there, and you know, their researchers. And obviously, we invite the researchers in the university to be there. Now, the question is, why would it be relevant and impactful for a faculty member and a postdoc and a graduate student and a research faculty to be part of this operation? And the idea is that this is leading us to rethink the notion and the interplay between fundamental and applied research. Traditionally, as we all know, in academia, you know, we believe that there is a kind of immediate translation from the fundamental to the applied. It's easy. I mastered the world because I have the fundamental. Let me go apply it. When you start applying it to real products, to prototypes, etc., you are realizing that you have to rethink your fundamental research. And therefore, an interplay between the fundamental and the applied is essential. For companies, what they are looking at is from day one, when they have embedded researchers, and we have companies that have their research operations completely embedded there, they are working at the forefront, as you said, Dr. Walker, of the research, but also pushing for, you know, the application side and the product side. So it's a win-win situation, and with the mission-driven agencies, and Dr. Perconte once again is here, we are working on precisely the priorities that were determined there. Now, so that's step one. Step two is that it's leading us also to rethink the way we work on IP and intellectual property. You know, from day one, with our privileged partners, we don't negotiate the IP. We have an agreement that the IP is yours up to a certain threshold, and therefore come and let's work together and let's build the solutions. So that's the approach. This approach has been very impactful, very successful, and we have been growing. And what's interesting is that the faculty and the postdocs and the research faculty and the students have been very receptive, because it's not a mandate, it's an invitation. If you want to partake into that, you're welcome to do it. So they shape the intellectual agenda, but they shape it with the mission-driven agencies and with the companies from day one. So that's the model that we have been working on. And so far, it has been very impactful, and other universities, and some of them are present today, have been asking us to explain how we did it. So it requires humility, it requires listening.
And what I've found over the years working with academic institutions is professors, maybe there'll be a professor in here that disagrees with me, which is fine, but they generally like to work on projects that DARPA funds, or as you say, mission-driven agencies fund, because the problems are very interesting. Yeah. The students, postdocs, and others get excited about solving those kinds of problems, and they can actually get quite a bit of resources associated with solving a very critical problem for DOD and for national security. And so they can build up a lab, they can build up a team, they can attract more postdocs. So they generally have a positive experience. The downside sometimes I hear from them is, well, you have metrics and you hold us to that at the review time, and yes, we do. But we generally are understanding about letting grad students finish, and et cetera. But it can be an exciting project for them and their students to work on compared to sort of the other stuff.
So Dr. Walker, I wanted to focus on something you said that has been very important for the universities. Essentially, you said keep bringing the talent and bring the talent wherever it is, namely on a global scale. We live in an environment where there is clear competition, there are tensions, and at the same time there are issues in terms of visas, etc. How do you think we can negotiate that?
It's a tough problem. It's, you know, as long as most of the best students in the world are coming here, I feel good about that. That's a good thing. We want to continue to tap into the best and brightest. In some countries like China, they're making it more attractive for those kids to go back home, right, and start research labs there. And so I don't think we're getting quite as many kids coming here, being educated and staying as we used to, which is a problem, I think, right? I don't think it's a problem to get them to come and do the research here. I think it's a problem if they leave. So whatever we can do to help solve that, but I think that's a strategic thing the country needs to get its arms around, and it's been difficult to do.
And, you know, speaking of competition, for instance, in AI, there are people saying, look, we are far ahead in terms of fundamental AI, whatever that means, but we are lagging, you know, the competition, you know, including China, in terms of applied AI. And, you know, one domain is the example of facial recognition that you alluded to. At the same time, people are saying, look, because they are focusing more on the applied aspect, they can leapfrog, you know, with respect to us. And when you look at the competitive landscape, where do you think we are, and what do you think we ought to do?
That's a tough question, but I still think in AI we're ahead. I believe in the foundations of AI and the research. We are still leading the world. There's certainly no question that China specifically is doing better and catching up and you know, investing heavily in that field. But I still think we're ahead. I believe that from an application standpoint, they may have an advantage in that they don't have the same privacy issues that we do, which I wouldn't I'd rather have the privacy issues we have and the ethics that we have here and work with those. But they don't have as many of the privacy issues, so I think they can build the databases and train their systems maybe quicker and more effectively than we've been able to do. I know in biology, for instance, biotech, they're collecting a lot more data than we are. So that's an issue we need to think through for the future. I will say where I think DOD is, from a foundation standpoint, DARPA invests, I think it's now, gosh, $350 to $400 million a year in the foundations of AI. We have an AI exploration program that we've developed where we put out a topic every month, and it's on our website. It's getting a lot of university participation in that work, but it's an 18-month, $1 million, let's go try something and see if it works. That is really focused on what we consider to be the third wave of AI. DARPA's been funding it for a while, I said. First wave is really expert learning systems. Second wave is really what we're seeing now being applied, which is machine learning. And the third wave is really how do humans and machines interface? How do we work together as partners? And in fact, we use the word partner in how we want to see AI evolve in this third wave. And so these AIE topics are all about that human-machine partnership. And I believe we've published 9 now over the last year. Again, once a month, you can submit a proposal. It's pretty short. And within 90 days, you will be awarded a contract. And we've held to that so far. And so it's a great way for universities, especially with some postdocs, to go try something quickly, turn it around, and then we hope that those will mushroom into the big DARPA programs that are multiple performers over many years. We're definitely focused on AI. I'm the co-chair of the President's Select Committee on AI with France Cordova, NSF. And so the country, the administration is taking it seriously as an area we want to lead and continue to lead in. But your question about application and what some of our peer competitors are doing is a valid one. My deputy likes to say AI is especially the foundations of AI, it's math, right?
Yeah.
It's really hard to protect math, and so it's going to be out there and for all to use. And so whoever uses it first and will have an advantage. We always want to make sure that we're not straying away from our ethical values and how we use it, though.
So, for instance, when we look at China, when you look at Europe, there is a massive investment, for instance, in China in creating centers for AI, in also training people in AI. Billions of dollars are being invested. The Europeans, are focusing on that too, one way or another. And we have various agencies, and clearly DARPA is a leading one with a clear strategy for AI for the nation. And there are implications, we discussed them together, implications with respect to research, with respect to remaining leaders, but also with respect to the human factor, namely AI is going to impact the workforce. Certain studies are saying that up to 50% of the job, as we discussed, are going to disappear or be completely transformed. And therefore, there is a massive work being done in various countries all over the world on an AI strategy that is also human-centered. Now, when we look at what we have here in the nation, we have DARPA, we have NSF, we have mission-driven agencies. Does it amount to a national strategy, or do we need to bring that together into a national strategy? And is this what you are referring to?
Well, I think it's starting, and I think under the leadership of the CTO, Michael Kratsios, who has put this select committee together, it's the closest thing we have, I think, as a nation to looking at all the different pieces of AI. So workforce issues, ethics is part of that. and then the foundational work and applied work. So it's on the web. You can go look at it. We, DARPA, because of this overall national strategy, select committee, committed to putting even more funding into the research side of it. That's our role. So other government agencies I know are looking at that and trying to step up and do their piece. But it's going to require, as I said earlier, when you talk strategy and you talk setting problem sets and initiatives, it's going to require different pieces of the government to come together and say, here is the government strategy. And I would say we struggle with that sometimes because our system is really decentralized. And there are good parts about that. I think it's more innovative because of that.
Absolutely.
We let 1,000 flowers bloom, and we see which ones pop up and are successful. But the trick is then finding those successes and applying them in strategic ways. And that's what we've got to be mindful about doing.
You were asked, if you want to focus on a moonshot approach, and everybody assumed that you were going to say AI, and you said the life sciences.
What did I say? Oh, okay.
The life sciences, synthetic biology, synthetic biology, and gene editing, CRISPR, etc. And then, beyond that, also how we can, the human-machine interface, even in this domain, through the mind-brain, etc. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I think I might have referred to the life sciences because that's the area where I see the most incredible technical leaps and bounds every day. The whole gene editing area, we have several programs at DARPA looking at how to make gene editing safe and actually reverse a gene edit if we need to. And so, you might think gene editing and biology and NIH has billions of dollars. Yes, that work is ongoing, it's being funded, but it's not sort of maybe as purpose-driven, right, as we would like. And so this program manager, Renee Wegerson, said, I want to first understand gene editing and how it works better, so the CRISPR-Cas9 and all that, and the different ways to do it. Because part of DARPA's mission is prevent technological surprise. And so in order to prevent it, you got to understand how it works first. And then how do we reverse it if we need to reverse it, if it gets out into the wild and gets out of control? And so that's what the Safe Genes program is all about. And so we've actually made a lot of progress there in being able to control gene edits. And that will, I think, change our world in the ability to actually cure disease. And we're actually looking at it can you actually protect a soldier in the battle? Why is DARPA doing this? Could you actually protect a soldier in the battlefield from chemical weapons and biological weapons by controlling their genome? Having the genome produce proteins that would automatically protect the soldier from the inside out. And so just the amount of technological change in that area and the ability, the more capability we have to engineer biology for use is why I think it's just the most exciting field at DARPA right now, and why we stood up an office in 2014 to focus on it. Gene editing is just one piece. We're also looking at infectious disease. How do you develop a vaccine in 60 days or less for 20,000 people for a virus that you've never seen before? So this is about being able to inject the cells in your muscles, say, to produce antibodies automatically for a vaccine that we've never seen before, and do it in 60 days or less to protect a large population. So this is work that we've been funding for about 10 years at universities, and now we're seeing, and we're going into clinical trials with this as we speak. And so, and then the whole neuroscience area. We've been able to show that people can control robotic prosthetics just by thinking about it. How does that translate into a pilot in a cockpit being able to think about making a maneuver and actually doing it, being able to, and this feeds into the whole human-machine partnership area. How do humans and machines work together in the future to do different tasks? And again, from a military perspective, trust is going to be a really, really important thing. So if I've got an AI system and I'm supposed to use it to somehow protect my platoon, I'm going to really have to trust that system before I use it. And so we've got lots of programs in AI explaining itself to the human, AI telling the human, you've asked me to do something I know I can't do, AI protecting itself against being manipulated by an adversary. And so lots of programs in that space that universities are in the front line helping us with.
So before we open it up for one more question, we have the young minds, I know that, looking at you, listening to you, and thinking about their future. Could you tell us a little bit about your journey? You know, you had options. How did you decide to end up where you are today?
Sure. Well, I received an Air Force ROTC scholarship to go to Notre Dame, and the tuition was really expensive back then. It was $6,000 a semester. But I got a scholarship, and I just had to pay room and board. And I ended up going to work for AFRL, Air Force Research Lab in Dayton, Ohio, which is where I was from. And my dad had been an aerospace engineer, so I kind of followed in his footsteps as an aerospace engineer. But I really have never looked back because, again, 32 years in the civil service, you get to move around, do lots of different things every 3 or 4 years if you want. You don't have to, but if you want, which is kind of what I've done. And you have one retirement system, so it's great. But the problems are incredibly interesting. And the feeling you get by solving a problem for a young airman or young sailor, young Marine, and going out and talking to them and seeing how what you do impacts their everyday life is really satisfying. And so I never really considered, going out and developing clickbait for the web. It just doesn't compare. And so if you have a passion for the country and for keeping it safe, I would highly recommend government service.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Walker.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for that dialogue, and we're going to keep it going and adding in some questions. And I may not have hit on this earlier, but we're going to do a mix of old school people in the room asking questions with microphones and online. I'm going to, for audience questions, I'm going to start with an online one. But before I do that, I can't resist just one of my own that I wanted to throw at you because, Dr. Walker, you said something very intriguing earlier about seeding the space, both in industry and academia, in different technology areas that are of concern for DARPA. And you also talked about how you hold your the recipients of your funding accountable to metrics, but how does DARPA measure whether they succeed? If your goal is to seed a technology area, how do you measure whether you've had success with a program and achieved that objective?
That's a great question. We don't measure, actually. We tell stories, actually. They're mostly true. But it really is hard to measure transition. Well, our metric is transition. Do we get technology over the finish line and help our warfighters? By the way, that is the national security mission, and it's important. We don't do anything unless it's for national security. There's a lot of side benefits to what we do that help the overall economy, the internet being one. So we try and tell stories about where we've been successful, but we also tell the failure stories too, because if you're trying to change the world, which is what we say we try and do in our programs, you're going to fail a lot. If you're trying to have a big impact on the world, you're going to fail a lot. One of my former bosses said if I could do low-risk, high-impact programs, I'd do them all day. But we generally do high-risk, high-impact programs. And so I think we did a look over the last 10 years and about, if you consider lots of different paths to transition, so directly to a program of record or through the commercial space or to a place like ARL that takes it to the next step, If you consider all those different paths to transition, we transition about 60% of what we do. But you know, if you look at direct transition to a program of record into a warfighter's hand, it's much lower than that. So sometimes it takes time, as we all know, in this business. Sometimes you're focused on solving a problem in a basic research space, and you work on it for 6-7 years, and it turns out not to solve that problem, but it solves a bunch of problems over here, right? So it's hard to measure this stuff, but you know, I'm thankful. I think I'm the 21st director of DARPA. I'm thankful that the White House, the Congress, both sides of the aisle, the Pentagon, has given DARPA the autonomy and the trust that it needs to actually accomplish our mission. And so that is a huge piece of why we're successful.
I'm going to ask one from the online submission, and whenever we have folks ask questions, we always say, please tell us who you are. So this question is from Russell Reed, the Washington Examiner, and it gets at something you've referred to a couple times. It gets at how much China and then, you know, the government-led investment in technology and how much that has grown. And given that the National Defense Strategy focuses on potential peer adversaries like China, how does that kind of change the way you think, or does it change the way you think about DARPA's investment? You mentioned preventing technical surprise. How does it shape the way you approach your programs?
Well, certainly, yeah. One of the reasons why we were created in 1958 was because of Sputnik, right? And the Russians put up the Sputnik satellite in '57. Dwight Eisenhower said, "I need a place that's located in the Central Department of Defense that can help prevent technological surprise to the country." So one of the ways we have thought about doing that over the years is to create technological surprise. And so I believe the best way to compete with our peer adversaries is to win those tech races of the 21st century, to stay ahead. And to win those tech races, we can't do it by protecting everything. It's not going to work. We need to do it by continuing to lead, continuing to work with the academic community, DOD laboratories, industry, both small and large companies, continuing to have the best people come to this country, produce for this country, even if it's academic, open, basic research. It's the job of the national security then infrastructure, DOD laboratories, the defense industrial base, DARPA, to take that open research, apply it in ways that we need to for national security, and we can do that in a protected environment. So we've got to be confident in the infrastructure and the organizations that we've built over 60 years, and continue to strengthen them and to move them forward together. That's the only way we're going to win. And I think we're still in the lead. We got to stay there, right?
I'm going to open up to questions in the room, and I'm going to start with Jason. He's standing right next to me, so I'm just going to hand him the mic. But for everyone else, the mics will come from back.
Hi, Sidney Friedberg. That's all right. I look like a Jason. But
could you say what you do?
Sure. I am a reporter, so I'm a professional asker of obnoxious questions. Mr. Director, first of all, thank you very much for talking today. I wanted to pull on the biotech in a few ways. One question is, you know, how does that tie into AI? I imagine the advances in computing are an important part of figuring out the genome or enabling that. And two is, you know, the devil's advocate question. Great, we can figure out how to make, you know, tomatoes repel bugs or humans perhaps generate proteins. Why, given the complexities of working on the human, both ethical and practical, is it better to modify the human, or has more potential to modify the human, than just, you know, hand the human an ampule of something and say, hey, if you're afraid of nerve gas, stick this in your arm? Yeah. You know, why is making the human the pharmaceutical factory worth the agony involved compared to just, you know, issuing everyone a pouch full of different things they can ingest?
Sure. Let me start with the second question first, and then you'll have to remind me what the first question was. The second question, The reason why we want to start with a human is to do what you said, which is, have a shot available for every case that might be out there, is becoming more and more intractable. Because with synthetic biology and the ability for folks anywhere in the world to make something that's slightly different than what it was before, you can't stockpile enough of the vaccine or the antivirus capability to protect the population against that in the future. So that's why we want to be able to, and this is all research at this point. We don't have the capability yet, but that's why you want to be able to actually have your body be the antibody factory, if possible. What was the first question again?
Well, I'll follow up on that one. Also,
Could you use the phone? We have folks.
sure. People talk about
But that means that you have 3 questions now. So stay with the first 2 because others would like to ask questions, if it's okay with you.
Yes, well, human enhancement, as opposed to the antibodies or the biodefense aspect, is that again an area where we would want to have the human be producing the pharmacological enhancements instead of the way athletes do it now, which is various ampules of things.
Yeah, I think our focus is about the protection aspect and the restoration versus enhancement. And I'll just say, in all these technologies, they're dual use, right? You can use them for good, you can use them for evil, and DARPA is about using them for good to protect our warfighters.
Hi, my name is Emma Bates. I'm a program manager and research associate here at the Project on History and Strategy. My question is, in the context of it's springtime for the Cold War analogy for the US-China competition, how do you think the paradigm of government investment in technology needs to change to meet the kind of investment juggernaut that China faces? And specifically, do you think we need to have a new version of the very profligate 50s and 60s that led to the space program and the internet and all of that? And do you think we invest government funds at the right stage of innovation right now across the different areas of government that do that? Thank you.
Let's see, the last question, investing at the right stages. I see government investment as really investing in the long term. That has traditionally been the role, and certainly DARPA's role in really, we're going to take a long-term view. We're going to make investments that are really high risk and that maybe the commercial sector wouldn't make. And so a lot of times people compare us to DARPA to venture capitalists. It's really not true, because venture capitalists have a pretty short-term view of the world. 6 months, they want to see a payoff. DARPA's investing for 20 years. And so I think government investment should stay in that space. I mean, it should be focused on the longer term. Now, the laboratories, DOD labs, have a little bit of a different mission where they are also focused on the near-term needs of the warfighter, and so that's slightly different. I forget your first question was about how do we compete with China and their investment levels?
Do we need kind of a new MBA, very expensive investment?
I see.
Throwing a lot of money at the problem.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a believer in just throwing money at a problem, because the money could be poorly spent, right? I think focused and directed investment in key areas is important. I think the department has taken that approach in the area, say, of hypersonics. We are focused, we're investing, and we've developed a strategy to not just do the first pieces, but actually get it into capability. So that's an area where I see a lot of promise. And I've been in hypersonics a lot of my career, and I've now over the last couple years seen a very strategic focus, which is great. We don't have that in every area. I would love more money at DARPA, but I think you get to a point though where you we have a good model, it works for us, and the money we have should be sufficient to make a difference.
Let me add another question from our online questioners. This one's from Dom Orsini from US Crest. And the question is that differentiating the roles of the service labs from what DARPA does is directed to Dr. Walker, but President Aoun, given that you've worked with DARPA and with service labs, I'd be interested in your perspective as well.
I've worked in both. AFRL, I started my career, I was there 9 years. AFRL did incredible things, but it had a couple different missions. It was a research and R&D organization. It was the smart buyer for the Air Force, right? It had the experts in the Air Force that could look at a Lockheed proposal or a Boeing proposal and say, they're right here, they're not right here. But it did, I use the term incremental innovation. I think incremental innovation is a very good thing. When I was there, I worked in a propulsion group. Our job was to develop the next inlet system for a jet fighter, or the next exhaust system for a jet fighter. And we did that through several generations, made it better and better and better, to these systems ending up on the F-22 and F-35. That is a core function, I think, of the DoD laboratory, where DARPA is a little bit more about, far term, how do you get away from doing it this way and do it completely different? So I think that's a big difference for me.
I mean, look, there is an easy answer and the reality. The easy answer is that when you look at translational research, you have results and you aim for results in the short term. And versus, as Dr. Walker said, you are going to redefine the field completely. In reality, what happens, and as Dr. Walker said, when you start working on a problem with short-term research solutions, sometimes you are going to hit new ways of rethinking the whole field. This is why I think that ultimately this dichotomy is not a real dichotomy. And there is, even for those interested, there is a book that is very interesting called Pasteur's Quadrant that discusses that very explicitly. So I encourage us all to look at it, but we have to go beyond this idea that there is a dichotomy between the two. It's research and exploration is going to lead us to results, but it's also to lead us to rethink what we have and and create new domains. There is a gentleman already with a mic, and he has.
Hi, my name is Logan McRoberts. I'm a recent graduate from Gonzaga University in Washington State. Dr. and this is primarily directed towards you, but Northeastern.
If it's tough, please send it to him.
No. He needs more questions.
Yeah, whichever of you feel more suited to answer it. But Northeastern's partnership approach seems exceptionally suited for addressing sort of the technological components of security and innovation, but to what extent does the partnership approach work towards innovative thought on diplomatic efforts that can curb national security threats or aid those technical innovations towards the same ends?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a great question, and the idea is that everything you do has implications for humans and for society and for the global interaction. And that's the quick answer to that. Therefore, you cannot afford to restrict yourself to only a technical domain. The director has mentioned, for instance, ethical AI. You're going to hear more and more about that. Companies, in fact, don't know how to deal with that, and we have a center precisely working on that, bringing the humanists, the social scientists, and the engineers and the computer scientists to work on that. I mentioned the notion of human-centered AI. Same thing. There are enormous implications. I mentioned some implications for the impact on citizens and the workforce. There are other aspects. The Royal Academy this last week issued a whole report on the human-machine interface, where if you're going to have implants, and we have them, and prosthetics, etc. And the director also mentioned how you can start using that to work with machines, thought to work with machines. There are enormous issues of privacies, of control. An employer can start reading your thoughts, etc. They raise questions like this. You cannot now serialize the issues anymore, and that's a great point that you raised. It's at all levels. The human factor has to be at the center of everything we do. As the director said, why is this research being done? For security purposes, for prosperity, and for the well-being of the citizens.
Hi, my name is Kyle Smits from Smits Laboratories. We are an applied research company here in Washington, D.C. We're a service-disabled, veteran-owned small business. Our employees are all combat veterans who earned their security clearances through the service of national defense. My question is, how do you look at the risk of small businesses like mine that are very innovative, that are really constrained on funding, and prioritize that risk and funding against organizations like the university that have massive endowments that are looking to keep their student body with interesting things to work on?
Well, at DARPA, it's mostly, since we're focused on proving something can be done, we take a lot of risk with small companies. It's mostly about the ideas that come in. So if you have a great idea, we're willing to listen. And if you can't get a hold of a PM that you're trying to get a hold of, let me know. We have a website. I don't know if you've looked at it, but it's all of our unclassified stuff is on there, and by tech office and broad agency announcement as we publish them. Every office has a 1-year open broad agency announcement all year long that has sort of in general what they're interested in, and so you can send an idea to that anytime. Obviously, it's better to find the program manager in charge of that and talk to them physically before you submit it. But and then they have a certain authority where they can go fund ideas like that and see if they evolve into something bigger. So definitely interested in small companies, especially here in the area.
Let me take a shot at that. You mentioned the term against. With this approach, it's a fail-fail situation. Let me give you an example. No university is self-sufficient. No company is self-sufficient. We all need to work on issues. So if you start with this premise, if we need to work on these issues together, that's the notion of partnership that we discussed. What can we do? What are we doing? For instance, explicitly, I mentioned that we have a campus, focusing on security research. We have incubators precisely for startups, but also we have a place for small companies, and we kept the cost extremely low on purpose in the cost of real estate in order for them to be there, to be embedded, and to work together. Because we don't look at it as either or. We look at it as working together. And that's the approach. So I really encourage you to look at the model where you don't look at the endowment. Some universities have large endowments, some have small endowments. The endowments do not matter. I think what you want to look at is whether there is an interesting project that could bring you and the university or the universities in question to provide solutions and to do what you cannot do on your own and what they cannot do on their own. That's the approach I take, and that's the approach we take.
Let me throw in another from our online watchers. This one's from James Tartaglia, who's a graduate student at American University. It's an excellent question. It says, what advantages do you see in working with foreign allies to solve mutual strategic challenges, such as those with AI, and how do we overcome regulatory barriers regarding these joint efforts? So, President Aoun, as someone who is leading a global university, I'm interested in your thoughts, and also Dr. Walker.
You can go first, I'll follow.
Okay, let me give you concrete cases. For instance, we just signed an agreement a month ago involving the universities and in England, Royal Holloway and Imperial College, in Keio in Japan, and another university in Australia, etc. And the whole focus was cybersecurity. I mean, as I said, going back, no university is self-sufficient, and no company is self-sufficient, and the talent, as Dr. Walker said, is going to be global. So we want to bring the talent here, and that's what we're doing. That's what universities do, and would like to continue doing. At the same time, there are opportunities to, going back to the question, to work with allies and friends to further common goals. And that's what's being done.
One of the second pillar of the National Defense Strategy right now is working with allies and partners. And so we take that very seriously. We are working on significant programs, government-to-government programs with Australia, Israel, the UK, but any basic research that's open and publishable anywhere in the world, we will fund. So we can work directly with a university, a company overseas, as long as it's unclassified and open. In fact, we have a company from Australia working on our subterranean challenge right now. So.
And we've got one more question here. I'm going to say we're running out of time, so I think this will be the last question, but please, over to you.
Thanks, Andrew. For you gentlemen today, my name is Carlos. I'm a Washington lawyer, was at DOD. I guess my question relates to the tensions being posed in universities by the nuclear in China as a near peer competitor. You talked about this now, about partners with allies. The thrust of the U.S. government's position in the last year has been, you don't want to be doing business with Huawei, with other Chinese telecom companies, and potentially broader than that. Yet you have a university here, on the other hand, that's open to all and focuses more on innovation and more of the work and talk about Chinese kinds of URD there. I'm not sure how you square the two of these work, particularly because it's a procurement ban that's going to be imposed in the next year that's going to say that any company, anybody who does business and draws on services and equipment of certain Chinese companies, they're not eligible to be a federal contractor. So how would you choose in that regard, President? And is that really what the U.S. wants to do, force choices on people in this way? We're really headed toward a real Cold War with China and essentially shutting down high-tech U.S. engagement with China.
I'm going to let you answer that one.
Yeah.
Because you're actually on the front lines.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, this is a delicate situation, and that we are learning here because we start, as Dr. Walker said, we start with looking at talent, no matter where the talent is. That has been our tradition. Now, with the new situation, we are learning that there are other dimensions that we need to add to that. And so it's not only bringing talent, but also, for instance, how, and you heard about it, there are recent cases where some faculty in existing universities also working with other countries were, in trouble. The faculty are in trouble, etc. So this is a new world for us. Do we have answers? No, we don't have all the answers. We're learning. We're learning by working with the various departments. At the same time, the strength of our system has been a system that, as the director said, attracts talents from all over the world, but also retains talent. So that is a big issue for us. When we train talent, no matter where they are from, and after 4 years or 5 years or whatever it is with a BS or an MS or an MA or PhD, we tell them, go away. That we are in some ways not benefiting from the talent that we have formed and we have educated.
That's right.
That's a big issue. That's a big issue. So we shouldn't look at it only in terms of input with respect to talent, but also in terms of output. And what other countries are doing is very revealing. For instance, Canada is saying to the students who apply to Canada, from day one, you will qualify for the green card. This will count towards your green card. Why? Because they are interested in, as you said, Dr. Walker, in not only attracting the talent, but keeping the talent. And I think we have a lot to do to retain the talent here now. Because, other countries are becoming much more proactive in providing the opportunities. And that's an issue.
I couldn't agree more with what you said. I think we didn't talk a lot about cybersecurity here today, but there are reasons why. The government's concerned with certain electronics. One of the things we're trying to think about at DARPA is, just like we do on networks, how do you stay secure in an unsecure network? How can we stay secure in 5G, for instance, in a 5G infrastructure that may not be secure? So that's a great, if you have ideas in that space, come talk to us.
All right, well, thank you very much. Before we, hold your applause for 1 second. I'm going to give you one administrator remark, and then we'll thank our panelists. So we're going to have a short coffee break here. We're going to reset the stage for the next panel. So feel free to stretch your legs, get something to drink, and be back by 11:30 for the start of the next panel. And please join me in thanking Dr. Walker and President Hunt.
Thank you, Dr. Walker. This was great.